We'll make a start, everyone. So firstly, hi everyone. Thank you very much for joining our Northern Branch PDN webinar. My name's Andy Wilson. I'm the PDN chair for the Northern Branch, and I'll be hosting today. So today's webinar will be hosted by Dan Sadler, who's the UK Low Carbon Strategy Director for Equinor, and he'll be telling us a little bit about the large low carbon projects throughout Europe that Equinor are working on. So I just want to say, firstly, a massive thank you to the sponsors, particularly during the times of COVID. It's very important for the PDN and the Guild in general that we get sponsors supporting these events. So a massive thank you to United Utilities, Mott MacDonald Bentley and Atkins for sponsoring this event. So after Dan's done his presentation, which I'll be handing over to him shortly, I will be doing a Christmas quiz, which is in place of the Manchester Christmas markets trip that we usually make, which obviously we can't do because of COVID at the minute. So after Dan's done his presentation, if you want to stay on, by all means, please do. Test your festive knowledge. When Dan's presenting, there will be chances for Q&A. If you just put your questions in the chat, then I'll put them to Dan at the end of his presentation. And I think that's everything. I shall stop sharing my screen so Dan can share his. Please just everyone, I think everyone's on mute, but yeah, everyone's on mute, so we're all okay. So over to you, Dan. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, and afternoon, everybody, and thanks for inviting me to share some of our projects with you all this afternoon. And help. I can't stop for the quiz, but I can take a few questions myself afterwards if there is any. So, like Andrew said, I'm the UK Low Carbon Strategy Director for Equinor. I was also the H21 Programme Director, and I was also a former technical advisor on the future of gas to the UK government, as well as 20 years in the onshore UK gas industry. So that's a bit of my background. But I'm here today just to give you a flavour of some of the projects that are going on around the world in this decarbonisation space. So just before I start, for those who maybe don't know much about Equinor, Equinor were formerly Statoil. So we started off with our origins in oil and gas, Norwegian state-owned originally. And basically we are a broad energy company. We have over 21,000 employees worldwide in 30 different countries. So a pretty big outfit, I suppose. But interestingly, when we say we're a broad energy company, we really are. And I think in terms of this low carbon space, probably Equinor are well placed, or as well placed as any company, to talk about this gigantic transitional change that's required as we journey towards net zero, and that's because of our history. So if you look at the projects that we currently do, we're the only commercial CCS operator in Europe, and we've been operating Sleipner since 1996, sequestering 1 million tonnes per annum of CO2 in the Norwegian continental shelf. We've been operating Snøhvit since 2008, sequestering 0.7 million tonnes of CO2 per annum, and that was the world's first onshore to offshore CO2 pipeline project. We took a FID on Northern Lights this year, so we'll be constructing the world's first CO2 import terminal, where we can actually accept CO2 shipped in a liquid form from around the world, and we can again store it safely in the Norwegian continental shelf. We also own the Kjellbergodden methanol plant since 1998, which has a 700 megawatt ATR and SMR combination to provide the hydrogen. But more than that, we're also a growing wind major. So we will have enough offshore wind by 2030 to power 5 million homes. We're building the Dogger Bank wind farm with our partners SSE, which will be the world's biggest wind farm when we complete it. And we also built Hywind Scotland, which was the world's first floating wind farm. So in terms of the kind of, if you like, from a hydrogen perspective, blue-green dynamics, I think we're probably as well placed as anybody to comprehensively talk on the subject. So just an idea about some of our ambitions and goals. I mean, Equinor, we are a very open company. Collaboration is a fundamental part of our approach. You can see some of the projects. I've just mentioned all the CCS projects there, where we've got Sleipner and Snorvit Technology Centre Mongstad. We own and operate with our partners Shell and Total, which is the world's biggest post-combustion CO2 test centre. I mentioned Northern Lights. And then from a blue hydrogen perspective, or a hydrogen perspective, actually, we've got Chelbegodden, which is a grey hydrogen plant, but obviously lots of operational experience. We wrote the H2O North of England report with our partners Cadent and Northern Gas Networks. Obviously, I was on the other side of the fence at that point. We've got numerous hydrogen projects in Norway, which I'll touch on in a bit. This hydrogen to Humber portfolio, and then obviously we've got our clean steel stuff with ThyssenKrupp in Germany at the moment. So probably coming a bit closer to home, you may all have heard about the Zero Carbon Humber project. If you haven't, there's a full 2-hour webinar actually that's really good to watch. And this is a bid that we've put into the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge as part of the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. And it's a £75 million bid, and it's an onshore system, and we've put it in importantly with the partners that you can see on the screen there. And so there's 12 partners. There's the infrastructure providers in terms of National Grid and Equinor, and then there's most of the industrial emitters from the Humber industrial cluster represented in the bid, contributing both financially but also with their intellectual property and that lobbying agenda. Importantly, there's also the AMRC, and for those who don't know the AMRC, that's the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre. They are developing what we're calling a Fit for Net Zero programme, which is a programme aimed at galvanising the UK supply chain, so that as we grow these nascent markets of hydrogen and CCS, we can try to ensure that we can establish as many jobs and embed as many jobs within that UK manufacturing supply chain as possible. But it's not just about the direct partners. The Zero Carbon Humber project has also got letters of support, and our comms manager, I think his front door must nearly come off the hinges every morning as more and more turn up. But that ranges from academia to workers' unions, to local authorities, industrial bodies, etc., etc. So there is a tidal wave of support for this project, which we believe could really become an international spotlight for the UK to showcase decarbonisation technologies. So what is the project? So for those who aren't maybe as familiar with the Humber, if I just walk you through from the tip, the Humber's the biggest industrial cluster by a long way in the UK. 12.6 million tonnes of industrial emissions, but over 30 million tonnes of emissions in the region. Easington is where about 50% of the UK's gas comes in. Then, if you come further inland, you've got the Saltend Chemicals Park on the North Bank, one of the oldest chemicals parks in the UK, 106 years old, I think, this year, which is what we see as the anchor project for the infrastructure. I'll come on to that in a minute. That provides about 2 million tonnes worth of chemical products into the international market every year. Come across the Humber, you've got Immingham, where a third of the UK refinery capacity is located, as well as various other industries. Further in steel, you've got British Steel, one of only 2 primary steel production sites in the UK. Keadby, which is SSE's Keadby Clean Power Hub. And then at the end is almost the jewel in the crown, if you like, of Drax Power Station, where Drax is Europe's biggest biomass power station with 16 million tonnes of available bio-CO2. And that gives us the opportunity to either create negative emissions, or BECCS, as we sequester that in terms of CO2, or potentially combine it with hydrogen to produce biofuels. And the aim of the project is to develop a parallel hydrogen and CO2 system. So industrial clusters need 3 things to decarbonise. They need post-combustion capture for those industries that can't fuel switch. They need hydrogen for those industries that can fuel switch, setting that transition to sustainable, and they need an element of BECCS, or negative emissions, to offset those hard to abate emissions. And so this system is aimed at connecting all the major emission regions with infrastructure to facilitate both of them opportunities. The onshore infrastructure has to be linked to offshore infrastructure, so we're also part of the offshore Northern Endurance Partnership bid, which is the end-to-end link to the Zero Carbon Humber project. So here's Zero Carbon Humber that I've just walked you through. The Northern Endurance Partnership is a bid for the offshore system where we're looking to decarbonise 2 clusters, the Humber and Teesside, with initially 1 geological store in terms of endurance. So a kind of 2-for-1 offer, if you like. And it's important to note that the Humber and Teesside actually represent around 50% of overall UK industrial emissions. So just decarbonising these 2 regions is a huge contributor to UK climate change ambitions. Importantly, if you look at the CCC's net zero report, what they recommend is that they should have 2 clusters sequestering at least 10 million tonnes by 2030. So this one offshore system can facilitate that transition with credible expansion of storage that's almost unlimited in its capacity over time, really meeting that longer term transition to net zero from the initial anchor projects. So back on to what is the anchor project, and just to skip you back, so remember HH Salt End here is what's going to be effectively the first user of the system, the justification to anchor the infrastructure. This is the Salt and Chemicals Park, for those who aren't aware, so it's a huge site. It currently emits around 3.5 million tonnes of CO2 every year. To put that into perspective, that's more than all the emissions of Teesside or all the emissions of Merseyside put together. It's comparable to Grangemouth, it's bigger than Southampton, so it's a huge emitting region in its own right. What you can see in the top corner of the screen is the Triton CHP, which provides combined power and steam to the chemicals park for the manufacture of the chemicals. So what's the plan? The plan is to build around a 600 megawatt autothermal reformer to fuel switch Triton on the site and also a big industrial user on the site, as well as producing a large amount of ammonia for trading as a green product into the international green products market, really establishing the UK at the forefront of that market, and specifically potentially trading into the maritime sector as a fuel to displace diesel and decarbonise the ongoing maritime industry. From there, that's the first step that would reduce emissions by around 1 million tonnes per annum. But then we've got very clear step-out strategies, adding more blue hydrogen capability, feeding into that hydrogen pipeline system I showed in the earlier slide, and also adding a green hydrogen dynamic where we can connect up to our Dogger Bank wind farm. So the blue hydrogen setting off the initial scale and the infrastructure, and then facilitating the onset of more green hydrogen over time. Now, I won't talk much to this slide. If you watch the link that I put in the chat, actually, we did a Building a Hydrogen Economy webinar at the CCSA conference, and my colleague Per Sandberg talked to this slide. But it's a real, just to show you when we talk about decarbonising maritime, which is one of the aspects of the 10-point plan, and it's also a potential opportunity in terms of HH Salt End, just how real that option is. So in Norway, we've got real projects going on at the moment, looking at ammonia use for shipping, hoping to take a FID on building an ammonia ship next year. And we've also got real projects looking at liquid hydrogen as well. Obviously different complexities and merits to each, but certainly the UK providing an at-scale ultra low carbon ammonia outlet represents a real opportunity in terms of decarbonising that maritime market, not just in terms of fanciful thinking, but in terms of real technology development. We also work in Germany with ThyssenKrupp Steel. So ThyssenKrupp are one of the biggest steel manufacturers in Germany. Again, they were on the webinar at the CCSA conference from a few weeks ago. Steel's a funny thing. I mean, obviously you want to get green steel, but there's different technologies. So at ThyssenKrupp, they've got blast furnace technology, like we have at British Steel, but obviously there's a plan to move to a DRI process and electric arc furnaces in the longer run. But you are actually able to replace a lot of the injected powdered coke in the blast furnace with hydrogen, offsetting a significant amount of the carbon emissions from the steelworks. So the project with ThyssenKrupp in Germany is to really source credibly how we provide that hydrogen to the steelworks in a low carbon format to facilitate that transition to green steel. And what we're looking at is potentially producing the hydrogen up at the coast, transporting it down to the steelworks using existing infrastructure within the region, and then obviously being able to offshore that in terms of the CO2 emissions likely to our Northern Lights project in Norway. So an end-to-end value chain proposition. So hydrogen production here, transported to a hydrogen transmission system. That's the coast, by the way. You can't see it very clearly, maybe. To the steelworks, there's other opportunities alongside that transmission system, and then obviously exporting that CO2 to Norway. So where do we get to? So what's important to remember is that, you know, when we started the H21 North of England stuff, or if you take a bit further step back, the H21 Leeds City Gate stuff, that's the ultimate aim, is that you're able to convert gas networks to hydrogen and decarbonise heat, keeping all the benefits of gas and the interseasonal storage, etc. But that's utopia, and you can't really jump to utopia. You kind of have to step there. And the aim of decarbonising the industrial clusters here with this Northern Endurance Partnership project is that you can start the hydrogen economy off at scale, linking it between credible industries, so flexible power working alongside intermittent renewable, industrial fuel switching, maritime. But that allows you to then grow the public confidence around these new markets, both hydrogen production and CCS, grow that familiarity in regions where you can make a tangible impact on climate change emissions, but also where they're more familiar with this type of industrial application. And then as we grow that confidence, we can then start to expand that infrastructure out in line with UK policy ambitions, be that to transport or indeed decarbonisation of heat. So one of the last slides, I don't know how familiar you all are with the UK government's 10-point plan, but it's a very good document, and I'd suggest it's worth everybody reading, because if you download it, it's very, very simple to read, which is, like all documents, should be a staple milestone of a good document. But the Zero Carbon Humber project and Equinor's hydrogen to Humber ambitions, and ultimately the A21 North of England ambitions really do play in perfectly to that 10-point plan. So I know there's only 8 points on there. There's nuclear elements and a couple of others that maybe aren't as applicable. But just to walk you through it, so, you know, the UK wants to develop a hydrogen market. And the great thing is they're more pragmatic and agnostic about where the hydrogen comes from, as long as it's low carbon. So blue and green hydrogen. And the target is to produce 5 gigawatts by 2030. And whereas I've been working in this space for the best part of a decade now, always trying to develop projects that can ignite imaginations and make people realise how you can make these markets work and grow, we've now got a real target to work towards, 5 gigawatts 2030, ideally 1 gigawatt 2026. So that's great. And in the Humber, the problem is 5 gigawatts is a big figure. You can't just magic 5 gigawatts. And even if you could produce 5 gigawatts, you can't just magic a market. So you have to have a real view on supply and demand, how you produce 5 gigawatts and where the market is that's going to use it. And also how you manage supply and demand, and you do that in terms of storage. And the reason that we think the Humber's got such a great opportunity, not all other areas don't, but it's probably, I think it's uniquely placed, both in terms of its diversity and scale of end-use market, its onshore geology, the depth of salt in terms of the interseasonal storage, and its offshore CO2 geology, which means that its ability to scale is almost unlimited. And then obviously the amount of renewable energy that lands on both the north and south bank, facilitating that transition from blue to green over time. So if you like, the ideal super place, as is defined in the 10-point plan, or as I like to say, a super duper place. So just the other points of the plan, CCS to have 10 million tonnes by potentially 4 clusters. And remember, it's as much as we're talking about Humber here, because we recognise that as probably an unparalleled opportunity for developing the first at-scale hydrogen market. All the industrial clusters need to decarbonise to reach net zero. So very good that the government wants 10 million tonnes by 2030. Green financing, so obviously we've got projects across the Humber. Drax have got real projects, SSE, Uniper, and obviously our H8 Salt 10 project and British Steel to really showcase that international spotlight of decarbonisation technologies, both pre and post combustion, across a range of end user applications, to really create that international spotlight and drive that inwards investment and that financing dynamics. Jet zero and green ships. So we've mentioned about green ships and the ability to fuel them with either liquid hydrogen or more likely, I think, ammonia at scale. And obviously, from a jet fuel perspective, if we can use bio CO2 and combine it with low carbon hydrogen, then there's also opportunities to produce all sorts of biofuels for different industries with minimal alternatives. We've mentioned offshore wind. The Humber's well placed, and the UK is incredibly well placed with offshore wind. But actually, that green hydrogen element linking with growing potential constrained energy to facilitate that green hydrogen market. Greener buildings, we're looking at doing a hydrogen village trial in 2026 is the UK government's ambitions. Village, maybe 5,000 houses, maybe up to a towns trial in 2030. So, Hull, Scunthorpe, other areas. Remember the Towns gas to natural gas conversion. I think they did 3 town trials. They did Canvey Island, Burton-on-Trent, and there's one up in Lancaster that always escapes me. Accelerating zero emission vehicles, it's absolutely right. We should be looking at electric cars, buses, trains, but obviously there is a place for hydrogen, both in terms of hydrogen for HGVs, potentially for cars, maybe in the longer term, buses, but you need availability of the fuel to really take that seriously. And I think the development of these first markets gives you that real availability where you can focus geographically your efforts for developing the hydrogen transport market and supply chain. And finally, public transport is predominantly focused on bus lanes and greening buses, etc. But again, the buses dynamic is you can only produce at-scale hydrogen buses where you've got at-scale hydrogen. Same with garbage trucks, HGVs, etc. So I think what hopefully we've set out there, and I know it's a quick conversation. We can, I can talk a long time on this stuff. But is this real ability, or if you like, this perfect storm of government policy, industrial appetite, timescales in terms of need to develop hydrogen economies and CCS industries, and this kind of recognition that CCS is no longer an option, it's a necessity, and that at-scale hydrogen is an essential part of any net zero pathway in terms of reaching a 2050 target. So that probably summarises my presentation, because I'm conscious I don't want to take the full 45 minutes or an hour. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of what Equinor are up to, and I'm happy to take any questions.
That was really informative and definitely very interesting to see the path that the UK needs to take, and Europe in general. So there's one general question at the minute from Jason. It's asking if you can share this presentation via email.
If I can share it?
Yeah.
I'll have a double check of it, but I think I should be able to send a PDF over or something like that.
Yeah, okay. So I've got one question. Obviously, there's government policies in place, there's targets in place. You mentioned about the offshore storage being targeted operational from 2026. When will the timeline for the actual build commence of the pipelines and storage, etc.?
Yeah, so what we're doing at the moment is we're hoping to find out if we've been successful in this ISCF application any moment. I mean, today potentially, but certainly I'd like to think before Christmas. And then the programme is that we will work towards a FID by hopefully the end of 2023. Okay. So that's going through the pre-FEED and FEED, or rather concept and detailed design phases by the end of 2023, taking a FID with a view to then moving into construction through 24, 25, 26. So that we're in a commission position in 2026.
Thank you very much. Has anyone else got any questions? I take that as a no. Like I said, thank you very much, Dan. Definitely very interesting. I'm sure everyone's enjoyed it as much as myself. if you have got any questions, feel free to email myself, Catherine, Norman, etc., and we can pass them on to Dan. And just to reiterate, Dan has put a video link in for a webinar related to his presentation, if anyone wants to watch that.
And Andrew, just on that, I just suggest to people that the question about can we share the slides, actually the link to the webinar is far better, because it was a slide, it wasn't just me presenting, we got all our different project directors to come on and talk about different projects in detail, and there's a Q&A session. So what I'd probably suggest, and it covers similar slides, so it covers the zero carbon Umber infrastructure, but like I said, ThyssenKrupp actually talked to their slide, Per Sandberg talked to the shipping slide, and then we have a few others in there, including ITM Power and Uniper. So I think it might be more useful for the people on the call to look at that link, which is in the chat, and to share that and to watch that. It's an hour, but it's not just a. I think there were 200 people on that call. It's not just a half an hour overview. We then take 30 minutes of pretty broad questions, which were pretty good.
Yeah, right, perfect. I've just reshared that. I don't know, with you sharing it before people joined, I don't know if people could see it, so I've just reshared it. So for anyone who wants to have a look at that, I've just reshared it. So have a look at it at your leisure.
Very good.
All right. Like I said, there is a Christmas quiz. So if you do want to stay on, please feel free. I know there's a couple of people who are joining a bit later. So yeah, feel free. Thanks again, Dan, for your time. I know that you're very busy, so I appreciate you taking your time out of your schedule to present to us.
My pleasure. So just I'll drop off now then, guys, and obviously enjoy your Christmas quiz, and then Merry Christmas to everybody and Happy New Year.
Cheers, Dan.